In your opinion, what makes a speaker truly great, especially in a technical or in a leadership environment?
Any speaker needs to understand that speaking is habitual, not natural. That they don't just wake up one day and they're a great speaker, that it takes practice. You've probably listened to yourself, right? And every time you probably pick up one thing that says, ooh, maybe I could do that better. If you want to get better at speaking in any genre, in any technical career or field, you've got to do at least those two things. Realize that this is a habit and find ways to listen to yourself, because you are your own best audience and you are most willing to improve upon something that you identify.
What actually makes a speaker great? And why do so many technically brilliant professionals struggle to get their message across? In this episode, I'm joined by Ruth Milligan, founder and managing partner at Articulation. We're going to explore the communication skills that every AEC leader needs but often overlooks. We're going to talk about what sets a great speaker apart from the rest and how managers can help their teams level up in their speaking abilities. As well, we're going to talk about why storytelling, even in data-heavy presentations, is the key to clarity and impact. Whether you're leading meetings, presentations, preparing proposals, or guiding project teams, this conversation will offer practical tools to communicate more effectively and lead with confidence. Before we jump in, I wanted to let you know about AEC PM Connect. This is where emerging and experienced leaders can learn about real-world strategies to drive performance, empower teams, and lead with purpose. Visit aecpmconnect.com and register today. We currently have events in Kansas City and New Jersey with more coming. I'm your host, Rebecca Swaby, and this is the AEC Leadership Podcast, previously the Engineering Career Coach Podcast. Let's dive right in. Welcome, Ruth. Can you share a bit about your background and your path that led you to becoming a founder, speech coach, and advocate for powerful communication?
I like to start this story in 2009 when I was watching a TED Talk with my husband in bed one night after a date night, and he fell asleep snoring, and I kept pouring through the website. For those of you, your listeners that don't know, TED is a conference. It stands for Technology, Entertainment, and Design. And they started posting their talks online around 2008. So in 2009, I was like, oh, this is interesting. And all this content had been posted. And I found myself on their website. And I found inside the website this tiny little blog post that said, if you want to host a TEDx event, click here. It was like a paragraph. And I clicked. And that by 2 a.m. that night, I decided I was going to host the first TEDx event in Columbus. And it ended up being the 35th event in the world. There have been 40,000 TEDx events since then in the last 15 years. But that event that I hosted in 2009 started a real journey for me in exploring the thing that I'm still doing today, which is supporting speakers in their space to be the best communicators they can be. I went to look for someone to help me in our second year of doing our TEDx Columbus and didn't find anyone. And I thought, well, wait a minute. I was a speech comm major in college. I was a speechwriter in politics. I was a press secretary. I did crisis communication. Why can't I figure this out? So I spent a year and figured out how to coach people in their own content. So I didn't want to write the content for them, but I wanted to help them organize their thinking to be the most influential and persuasive they could be with their audiences. So that's one of many stories that brings me to you today. And now we do it full time, have been doing coaching and training full time for 15 years. And in a lot of the spaces that you were here to talk about. So I'm delighted to be here and help your audience learn how to pull their best communications out.
Wonderful. So you've seen a lot of speakers then over the years. And
Yes.
I'd love to hear, in your opinion, what makes a speaker truly great, especially in a technical or in a leadership environment?
Sure. So I'll answer that for any speaker, and then we can click one level down on a technical speaker. Any speaker needs to understand that speaking is habitual, not natural, that they don't just wake up one day and they're a great speaker, that it takes practice. And at the other end of the spectrum, it takes feedback, and especially their own reflections. So if you're not willing to listen to yourself, and as a podcast host, I always say, Rebecca, I'm sure the first podcast you recorded, there were some cringy moments and you're like, ooh, I could do better at that. Or maybe you were perfect to begin with because you seem like but you've probably listened to yourself, right? Over the years, months, however long you've been doing this. And every time you probably pick up one thing that says, ooh, maybe I could do that better. Is that true?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's always notes after.
Yeah. So exactly. So the point being is that you have a natural built-in feedback and reflection system with the fact that you are recording. If you want to get better at speaking in any genre, in any technical career or field, you've got to do at least those two things. Realize that this is a habit and find ways to listen to yourself because you are your own best audience and you are most willing to improve upon something that you identify. So if I end up listening to this podcast and I said once or twice, I'll say, "Oh, Ruth, you have a 0 policy." I try very hard not to have filler words. I have been with other podcast hosts who've told me they've pulled out 300 filler words from their guests before. Now that guest isn't listening to the filler words because by the time the podcast is produced, they're gone. All the ums and likes and so's. But for the everyday person, you can record on your voice memos on your phone. You can record on a Zoom call and just take a minute or two and listen back. So that's my bigger answer, which is be willing to be vulnerable and be your own audience and know that you get into habits for a reason and you can get out of them for a reason. And then to narrow down the second part of your question for technical communications, without a doubt, it's knowing your audience and what level of technical expertise they have versus what you're trying to communicate. And making sure you're not talking too high above them or too far below them for the question that you're trying to answer. So let's say you're doing a proposal or a bid versus a project update versus a budget. All of those three things might have different language, different styles of communicating, and it's knowing that your audience is aligned with you in those technical moments. The worst thing you can do is bring a deck of charts and graphs to somebody who only wants to know the bottom line. And I would say that while that is applicable to this industry, it's really applicable to any as well. So we want people to feel as if your information is accessible.
Strong leadership drives strong projects. Become an AEC PM professional and give your team the leadership skills they need to thrive. Customized PM development, premium content, and a leadership edge that sets you apart. Learn more at aecpm.com.
That is a great bit of advice. And personally, what I find to be challenging sometimes is understanding how the person on the other end might receive the information when you're about to go into the presentation, because everybody's different. As you said, some people just want to hear the bottom line, where others might appreciate that personal story that you're fitting in, for example. So how do you recommend going about the research process to begin the presentation, to understand who you're presenting to and what they might appreciate?
It's a great place to start. I always like to say there's usually a question that the audience has. You just start there. I actually just spent an hour on a coaching call, and the speaker came in barreling with a big metaphor and a big opening hook to a talk. And I said, hold on. What's the question you're answering for the audience? And the second part of that is, is it a question that they already have, or is it a question that you want them to have? And those are two different things. So is it a question they have? Why are we off budget? Why are we off schedule? Why is supply chain, right? So they come charging in with a question they want you to answer. But it could be that you have the question you need them to have, because it could say, you don't know we're off budget. So I'm going to pose a question that says, did you know we're off budget? And that's going to be a different sequence of information sharing. So Rebecca, I always say aligning with what the audience has invited you in to do, who's hosting that meeting, who's driving that question, there's nothing else that matters more. And once you've identified that, then all of your content and storytelling can align with it. But if you go in saying, I'm going to talk about the budget, and they want to talk about the schedule, well, you know how that's going to go. Not so good.
That makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like making sure that your mindset is very much focused on the audience at the end of the day, and making sure that you still are delivering what you came to say, but ultimately aligning that with what they came to hear.
Correct. And Rebecca, it is likely that you have 100 pounds of information in your brain walking into that meeting. And the last thing you want to do is share 100 pounds. You want to share the 1 or 2 pounds that they care most about. And you might say, but I know all this information and I need to share it all. And the answer is really you don't. Because at the end of the day, you need them to do something. You know, you're speaking, you're writing, all of your communication activates something. I need you to approve something. I need you to move a project forward. I need you to agree with me that we need to fire somebody, hire somebody. And if you're not thinking about that call to action step in your communications, then you're going to want to shove 100 pounds at them. But if the goal is, I just coached a construction big bid project, and one of the stories they told was we had to fire a contractor. And they wanted to tell the story about firing the contractor. And we had a debate, like, is that a story you want to lead with? Or is that something that you can use as in the Q&A that says, tell me a time and a place when something went wrong on a job? Oh, yeah, I got one. You know, I had this contractor, they bid, they didn't show up, they failed all the specs. And then all of a sudden we had to pivot and we self-performed and we did it ourselves. It was a really good story, but I suggested they may not lead with it. So the point is you come in with all this content, the way you think of it like a sieve or a colander. You're kind of working through what are the pieces that really matter to the action that you want that audience to take.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And so it's a great thing that you have 100 pounds of information in your mind, but ultimately one goal, one sort of call to action, and then being prepared with all that information at the right time, you can use it.
Correct. Yes.
Awesome.
It's all about timing.
Awesome. So for leaders in the AEC space or other technical fields, how can they create an environment where their teams can actually develop stronger communication skills, particularly when preparing for presentations or client meetings, which, as you know, come up very often in this field?
So I like to talk about low stakes and high stakes moments. And I think that for leaders who are growing, they need a bunch of low stakes moments. They would be like maybe the quiz in your academic class, something that doesn't have a huge grade to it and the consequences are low, but it still starts to build a little bit of the adrenaline and a little bit of the spotlight is on me, and I need to say something concise and consistent with the question. But I'm also not going to get my career isn't going to be thwarted by it. I'm not going to lose the client work. So creating some low stakes, very simple, what I would call formative assessment opportunities. And that could just be that, every staff meeting, the person changes who gives a 3-minute update, or it's giving support to the person who's their first time in front of the client, as opposed to just saying, hey, guess what? Tomorrow you're in front of the client. It's saying, hey, next week you're in front of the client. Let's practice what that feels like. We're going to do a quick simulation. We're going to let you watch it back. And those may feel like big things, but they actually don't take a lot of time. The process of watching yourself and getting feedback is, as like I said in the beginning, is seminal. So understanding that somebody just doesn't go from 0 to 60 because you said for them to do so. The implicit versus explicit moments are hard, meaning haven't they watched me do it? Think about a doctor, and this isn't your space, but think about a doctor who's doing a presentation at Grand Rounds, which is like when they reveal all their technical information about some case. And the resident is sitting there saying, I'm supposed to mimic. But no one actually tells them what the steps are to build a Grand Rounds talk. They just say, just absorb it. And that's what we talk about, implicit versus explicit. So I think the takeaway here is, if the teams that you're trying to develop, good new leaders, in the AEC space, I know you're not medical. Don't just assume that the implicit is understood. That make things explicit. Here's the time you have. Here's how we expect you to practice. Here's when I'll practice with you. Here's the question that you need to answer. Here's how this particular client likes to do Q&A. Just be very, sort of interrogating about that situation and that genre. We have hundreds of different genres that we speak in. This, right, with us is a genre, right? A client conversation or update is a genre. A bid is a genre, right? So all of them are different. And don't assume that just because they did well in the panel one day, that they're going to do well in the bid the next day. Those take different pathways and preparation. And it's not that you should say, oh, I don't have the time. You say, I want them to be successful long-term, so I need to take a minute to tell them what is expected. And if I don't, then I should expect them to fail. So if that helps.
That makes a lot of sense. And I love the distinction between practicing in a low stakes environment versus high stakes. And it's sort of reminding me about, they say when you're giving feedback, especially performance feedback, it's good to recognize a lot of positive things that are happening regularly. So then when you have to provide the harder feedback, the more critical feedback, you've sort of built this foundation of trust. And it's very similar, it sounds like, to what you're suggesting, is looking for opportunities every day or a few times a week to practice so that you're ready for the big stuff.
And Rebecca, I might tuck in a word that we've been using called the shaded habit, which is, it feels like this. So you're in a staff meeting, just yourself. No client is there. You're talking about a project. And someone says 20 times, like this, like that, or other filler words. And you, as a manager or director or leader, just sort of shrug your shoulders and say, yeah, that's just Rebecca. That's just how she talks. And then 2 days later, the person who was supposed to be at the client meeting gets sick and they say, Rebecca, you get to go. And guess what? You take all those shaded habits with you, all the filler words, what we call disfluencies, maybe talking too fast, maybe talking too much. And no one ever gave you feedback in that low stakes moment that those were things that might hold you back when you get to the high stakes moment. So the reverse is true. The first question was, what can we do intentionally? I would like to just make sure people know that you're avoiding or ignoring seeing those small bits in those low stakes moments are also important to catch and say, let's work on that before it matters. So the reverse is true in terms of even if you don't think it's intentional or that you should work on it, if you kind of see something, say something. I'll just give a very quick anecdote. I worked with a speaker in Europe last month on a technical presentation, and he did very well. It was very difficult. It was a big stand-up in front of 200 clients. And 2 weeks later, he was invited to give a second presentation to the internal team for an investor conference. And the practice session or the pre-session went so badly, the person who invited him said, we're never going to invite you to talk again. And what happened was, in our session, we were giving him feedback on all of the things that were important. And then he promptly stopped practicing them. He didn't appreciate that was a learning moment that he needed to carry through and keep working at it. He just went back to his old habits. Even though we gave him a list of 3 or 4 things, he worked at them, he got rid of them, he just went back. And then it thwarted his opportunity to be in front of other influential people and to continue to grow his career. The feedback said there's no way he's getting invited. So I encourage managers and directors to lead with grace and kindness and say, I want to help. It may not matter in this staff meeting, but it might matter if you get invited. And so let's work on it now.
So that makes a lot of sense. And I would imagine that most of our audience would agree with you when there's problems like saying over and over again or we want to fix them. We want to address it. But at the same time, practically giving that feedback can be challenging. So I'd love to hear from you, Ruth. Do you have any strategies or example scenarios you can share about how to give that feedback kindly but effectively?
Absolutely. This is actually one of my favorite things to talk about, and I'll try to be brief. The first is for people to know the feedback may be coming at any time, that like we have a contract that I am allowed to help you develop, and I may give you feedback, and you shouldn't feel threatened by it. Sometimes we think, oh, not my monkey, not my circus. This person isn't my problem, and so therefore I'm not going to give any feedback. But if you really are trying to help develop somebody, it is your job. So that's the first thing, is to make sure the social contract exists before the feedback comes. And then the piece about feedback that's so important is not just to say to them and raise their awareness that they have a disfluency, a filler word, something that's something that's nudgy, as I like to say, but it's telling them what to do instead of it. So how to replace it. And in this case, let's just use the word, or like for a quick example.
Sure.
What I want you to do, Rebecca, is to try to take a breath while saying and it could be any one of those words. So on the count of 3, take a breath and say Okay, ready? 1, 2, 3.
Can't do it.
Can't do it. So what did we learn? The best way to replace one of those filler words is to practice taking a breath. It might be the cheapest, easiest, fastest trick in the world, but our stress response and our need to fill every space and not have a pause gets in the way of us recognizing that our breath is actually like the best tool we have. So if I feel like an is coming on because I don't know what I'm going to say next, I'll just take a breath. There we go. I didn't say to connect the first thing and the second thing I said, and everyone had a minute to catch up. So I encourage all of your listeners to practice this at home. You will not, it is something that you can try on your own. You will not be in any threat. Like this isn't like a dangerous stunt trick.
Yes.
And encourage others to do so. And sometimes as a manager or director, it might be that you give them that space to take the breath and not interrupt them. So on the flip side, if I'm asking you to take the breath, don't use it as an opportunity to interrupt and just keep talking. So a few steps in there. 1, make sure you have a social contract, which could just be say, hey, I've heard this. Do you mind if I give you feedback? Is that okay? I'd like to help you move on. 2, remind them right afterwards and get them to help recognize the practice of maybe over the next week, just try to take a breath for the next meeting and see how you do. And then also give them the space to practice and not interrupt them or be too judgmental in their development.
Thank you for that. And I love that it challenges managers to possibly upskill their communication skills as well, too. They need to figure out the strategies. They need to figure out potentially the way to improve upon this habit. It's not just a matter of pointing out the issue. They're helping you along. So that's great. I'd love to hear, we have many AEC professionals that participate in group presentations or proposals, panels, project updates. You've probably seen a lot of missteps over your career. I'd love to hear some common missteps that you see in those settings, and how can teams present with more clarity and more cohesion?
So I love the big pitch, the consequential, complex 5 or 6 people going into a pitch for a business, either defense or initial interview, or, it's the last 10%. Submitted the proposal and they want to do the meet and greet, or they just want to hear, who's going to be on the team and meet the project engineer, meet the estimator, meet the superintendent, whatever roles there are in that particular pitch, meet the, the lead architect, etc. And I can tell you that it's like a squat meets a sprint. And what I mean by that is that you have to use all of your muscles at once and go fast. So the first thing is normally these invitations are fast, meaning that you got a week to prepare or 2 weeks to prepare. So you want to make sure you know what your team is and who's going to be there before that invitation comes, so that you have vetted them, that they're good, that they have some presentation skills. Your best person on the project may not be your best presenter. And that's tricky. So you've got to either work with that person to come up to speed or maybe keep them in the wings for a different part of the process. The second is that there is a very clear understanding of the rules of engagement, that the boundaries of the invitation are understood by everybody, especially the most important one, which is how much time do you have? The number one mistake people make in these pitches is they underestimate how long things take or how fast time goes, especially when you're in a stress. So you're given 5 minutes and all of a sudden you've taken 10. That means you've taken 5 minutes away from someone else. And that other person has the money quote that is going to get the points. So understanding how fast time goes and your stress response actually makes it feel like it's slowing down. And then I'd also say that I think they overdo on slides and content, and reading slides, I think is a big mistake. I think they're there usually in these interviews to get to know you. They want to have a conversation. They want to know that you can think on your feet. And sort of slides provide sort of a top line overview to the questions that you think they want answered. But they're there to know that they can trust you and talk to you and problem solve with you and be present. And then the last thing is a lot of people don't read the room. They don't see that people are disengaged, or they're not watching the clock, or they look between the folks, or they're not noticing that someone's got a question that hasn't been answered and someone else is going on long. So that's the squat part that I've got to be thinking about when I want to present, supporting my team members and paying close attention to them as if I would want the audience. I'm looking at you like a spouse on a stage at a political campaign rally. I adoringly watching you speak because that's what I want the audience to do. I am paying attention to my part. I'm trying to help answer questions. There's not to underestimate how many discrete things are going on at once. So that's the summation of many, many years of doing very complex team pitches for everywhere from $15 million projects to $5 billion contracts. So they all kind of relate.
Okay. And having been in some of these rooms before, thinking about how the audience is reacting, as you just said, and what's going on around the presentation that you're giving, I found sometimes the people in the audience, they might be on their phone at times, they might be looking at their computer, taking notes, or they might have a big frown on their face, for example. They don't look happy, or they do. But how do you go about approaching the situation when you see that the audience is losing focus or disengaged?
Oh boy. I'm hearkening back to one of my most difficult situations where somebody was trained to look between the people and missed all of the cues that they were unhappy. And her boss tapped her to sit down to recover the presentation. And she simply said to the audience, "It's clear we're not answering your question." And recovering the time to say, what's most important to you that we can answer? And being honest and saying, I think that we may have gotten off topic here. So let's make sure with our time left, you're getting what you need from us. Make an audible. It's better than leaving that room not having answered those questions. It's tricky, but you want to do everything you can to avoid it. But on the flip side, somebody may come in also with a wild question that takes you far off topic. And that's also on you to have some message discipline to stay inside what you want to say. And that's another set of skills around sort of hot seat training, which says that if they ask me what's for dinner, I might say, I'd love to talk to you about dinner after we finish talking about our proposal, right? That there is a way, what we call bridging and pivoting back to say, in this moment, we only have 10 minutes. So let's talk about what's most important and not let us get distracted. So that's, it's having courage is the bottom line, to redirect and recognize we came here with one set of things and we've kind of gotten off track, but we really still want to answer your questions.
Makes a lot of sense. And it does require you to be brave in that moment and sort of call out exactly what you're seeing and redirect. And having some canned transition sounds like it could be very helpful too. As you just said, we only have 10 minutes. What's the most important thing that we focus on? So having practiced some of those transitions as well, I could see that being super useful. So Ruth, are there any other best practices that you have to share with us and with our audience around how to win pitches?
Yes, there's one more very important thing, and it's called the rep. It's how many repetitions can you do as a team to prepare? And that takes time and schedule and commitment. And I have found that with very busy teams that are in the field or have multiple projects going on, that finding the time for the rep is just so difficult. But I promise you, the teams with more reps are going to be better prepared going in and have a better chance of winning. So that means getting together, making sure you know your timing, running through your slides, making sure that the Q&A, who's being the quarterback for the Q&A, who's taking those questions, how are you passing them around, what stories are approved to share, what stories aren't, just in case you go off into the wilderness, as some people do. But it's biting the bullet and saying this is really important if we want to win this bid.
That makes a ton of sense. Client conversations can be difficult at times, especially when it comes to high stakes technical decisions, for example. What strategies do you have to help project managers who are leading these meetings build more confidence?
Sure. I actually just did this recently with a project manager client conversation, and it went like this. I brought all my charts and graphs, and the client just kept getting more and more upset because the information that they were presenting wasn't what the client wanted to hear. The project wasn't going as the client wanted, and they needed some time to course correct it. And in the meantime, this particular client was emotional and a little maybe irrational, very impatient, and had a lot on their plate and did not want to hear bad news. So I have a feeling this is similar for lots of your audience.
Absolutely.
And so we did what we call some A/B testing, which was, does this work or does this work? And I suggested that for the next meeting, they go in with the bottom line, which was still kind of difficult news, but then they just be quiet. Stop talking. And listen to the emotion of the client. And that's the job. Let them talk it out. Let them share how frustrated they are. Don't try to solve it. Don't try to redirect them. Just embrace it and acknowledge, I understand this is frustrating. We're doing the best we can. Don't try to share more graphs and charts. And believe it or not, that A test didn't need a B test because it worked and the client felt heard. And that's all the client really wanted at that time, was to know that his frustration was not falling on deaf ears. Now, that doesn't work for everyone. But knowing in the B test, if that didn't work, the B test would have been, what's the most important thing to that client? And back to this research and investigation and sort of, are they a budget person? Are they a timeline person? Are they a quality person? Are they a safety person? What is it that's most important to them that's triggering their emotion? Because these difficult conversations there's usually a big pot of emotion sitting right in the middle. And so knowing how to anticipate that and get ahead of it. Say, I know that, today we're going to talk about a lot of things, but I realize that safety is your most important sort of topic. So let's start there. Get the most important thing done. The big elephant in the room needs to be addressed first. Because if the elephant isn't addressed, then they're just going to keep thinking about the elephant. And then the last tip, there's always 3, is watch your own emotional response and your own stress response, to not become over talkative, to not get defensive, to not be accusatory, but to actually try your best to take deep breaths, use breath and pause and calm to just read the room and know this is just, sometimes it's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's messy, and that's okay. The world isn't perfect. And so when we try to gloss things over too much, that's when we get into those situations that say, everything's supposed to be perfect, but it's not. And that's when the difficulty really amps up. Does that help?
That's very helpful. And I was just going to ask about that piece, when you're emotional, the client could be emotional and you're supporting them and you're proposing a plan, but at the same time, you might feel like you need to defend your work and your choices or whatever it is.
Yes.
You have your own feeling about the situation too. So it sounds like making sure that the client ultimately has an outlet for their, how they're feeling about the situation, being able to share their feelings as well, but taking care of yourself in that process too.
Yes.
Be that outside of the meeting or with a trusted colleague, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah. And check yourself with a colleague. It could be that you're the emotional one and the other one's the calm one, and you say, maybe you take the lead on this call. Like, know yourself,
Right.
know your
Right.
team. Like that's what a team is for. Somebody's the quarterback and somebody's the running back and somebody's the tight end and somebody's the kicker, right? You're not always good at everything. And
Yeah.
recognizing that your stress response, which is what this is rooted in, may be triggered faster than someone else's. And I think that grounding, we do things like put your hands on the table, put your feet on the floor, breathe from your belly, be present in the room, really like find as many kind of touch points as possible. Those are giving your proprioceptive system and the vagus nerve some calm that allows you to not feel like you're going and seeking input or feedback in the wrong way. And that was a really quick way of saying, work on your own stress response before you go into the room. Sometimes it's a mantra. I'll give it to you in an even better way. Sometimes it's a mantra. You got this. It's going to be okay. This too shall end. You will get to the other side, right? Whatever that, this isn't forever. I'll say this conversation is not going to kill me. It may be uncomfortable.
Right.
And it could be your breath. It could just be giving your breath some more space to calm that nervous system down. And it could be the body where I started before. It could be, I need some better grounding. So your brain, your breath, or your body, those are 3 really productive ways to get yourself more grounded and centered for those difficult conversations. And sometimes we're not in control. We want to be in control in those moments. And sometimes somebody else takes the driver's seat. And that's when things go out of control, go out of the way.
Great. Well, let's back up a little bit. Before things are going awry, there's always the opportunity to deliver your message in a great way, a way that resonates with the audience. I'm a huge fan of storytelling, but I know it's not always the first thing that comes to mind with engineers and project managers working with technical data. So why do you believe storytelling is important in these fields, and how can professionals integrate this into their presentations without compromising on the technical accuracy of it all?
So we know from Aristotle, I'll get nerdy for a second, that there are 3 anchors to what's called the rhetorical triangle. The ability for us to feel influenced by someone because of their expertise, that's the ethos. The ability to understand the logic and the data, that's the logos. And the last is the pathos, which is the ability to feel emotion and to believe something is true because I have seen it, touched it, feel it, the sensory information is there. The only way we get that third rung is through storytelling. So when I told the story of watching the TED Talk in 2009 at the beginning of the podcast, I was putting myself in my situation in my home in Columbus, Ohio, watching a talk on my laptop with my husband. It was raining outside, and I see this blog post and it inspires me. That sentence, that's a story. Stories don't have to be long. Stories can be metaphors. Stories can be analogies. Stories can be very quick hits. They don't have to be these long pieces, but they are a time and a place and a character doing something that allows you to feel the emotion and the resonation. And partially because I have senses, right? I've got the touch, the feel, the sight, the smell, the sound, the smell, etc. That's different than the data, the charts, the graphs, the numbers, the budgets. And if I only had data, I would say, well, how do you want me to feel about it? And if I only had storytelling, I'd say, well, what am I supposed to know about it? And so that actually takes us back to that triangle, which says that we always have to have credibility to deliver something. That the ego of our audience always wants to be sated, that you have license to influence me. And my brain is right and left brain. I need both. So storytelling for the cases of, here's an example. I just did a pitch practice for this company. It was big. It was a fire station. It was a construction bid, and they were working in partnership with an architect firm and an engineering firm. And they had 5 or 6 really, really good fire department, fire engine, firehouse stories. And in the deck, they were sort of lost. They were like, oh, and by the way, we've done these firehouses. And I was like, why would you tell any other story? Why wouldn't you just lead with these 5 to say, this is what we see
Right.
you, we understand what you're doing. And by the way, sure, we have a diversity of experience, but we're building this thing for you that we've already built for 5 other people. And pick one of those that might have been the most complicated or presented the most difficulty to show that we can problem solve and we can be creative and you can call us and all the other things that clients really want, which is to be able to pick up the phone and say, yes, can we work through this together? And they were like, oh my gosh, I didn't even think of that, right? So sometimes it's sitting right in front of you and it's just a rearranging. Sometimes it's saying the brain actually definitely needs to draw out something resonating and emotional. And emotional doesn't mean like crying or that kind of emotional. It just means that my brain is triggered in a way that connects.
Ruth, this has been a fantastic conversation. Before I let you go, I'd love to hear if there's any final advice that you have to share with AEC leaders and professionals in our industry who are looking to improve their communication.
Thank you. What a great final question. I would say take stock of your one habit that you have that's holding you back. And you may not know what that is yet, but just start with one. Don't think that you have to become a great communicator overnight, but recognize that there's probably a habit you got yourself into that isn't going to serve you moving forward in your leadership, and tackle that. It could be in making time to practice. It could be in the filler word. It could be in the understanding what the audience really needs. It could be in building the right team to support you because you've got different skill sets. It could be that you need a better graphic artist for your slides. It could be that taking words off the slides. It could be stop reading slides. Whatever it is, just pick one thing and recognize that you can work on it and it can be successful. And then maybe pick another. I think that's the best way we know to improve along the way. This doesn't have to be Mount Everest. This can just be the local, state park where you just start off small and build some muscles that you may not have experienced before. And patterning off of other people is one way to start, but it doesn't actually change your own habits. So just watching other people talk is a good way to say, I'd like to be better like that person, but don't think that person is natural. That person has been practicing their habits too.
Great advice, Ruth. Thanks so much again for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. This has just been a really great conversation.
Please remember, you can find all of the show notes from today's episode at aecleadershippodcast.com. There you'll find a summary of the key points that we talked about in today's episode, as well as all other links to resources, books, or websites that we mentioned.